Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And today we are headed to the dark side of the American heartland.
Hmm.
Um, you know that kind of story that makes you double-check your locks and wonder who you can really trust.
Yeah.
We're talking about Ray and Faye Copeland, an elderly couple from Missouri who hold a truly grim distinction.
Mm.
The oldest couple ever sentenced to death in the U.S.
It's a case that really gets under your skin. You have this image of an elderly couple rocking chairs on the porch, living a quiet life,
Right?
and then you learn about the horrific crimes they committed, and it shatters that whole image of harmlessness.
Well, and that's what we're going to try to unpack today. We've got excerpts from Wikipedia about Ray and Faye Copeland, and frankly, the more I read, the more questions I had.
Right.
Like, how does this even happen? How do you go from seemingly ordinary folks to cold-blooded killers?
Right.
So where do we even start with a story like this?
Well, I think the best place to begin is with Ray Copeland's early life. He was born in 1914 in Oklahoma, right in the middle of the Dust Bowl. So imagine that kind of childhood. Poverty, constant moving, never enough to go around.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a recipe for desperation.
Exactly. And for Ray, it seems that desperation turned into a pattern of criminal behavior early on. Even as a teenager, he was already in trouble with the law.
So what kind of crimes are we talking about? Like petty theft or something more serious?
It started with things like livestock theft and forging checks, but that tendency towards deceit, towards taking advantage of others, it became a constant throughout his life.
Almost like those early experiences sort of warped his moral compass or something.
It's hard to say for sure, right? Nature versus nurture and all that. But even before he met Faye, it was clear that Ray was someone who was willing to operate outside the law.
So let's talk about Faye. What was her background?
Faye Della Wilson was born in Arkansas in 1921. She and Ray married in 1940, and they started a family pretty quickly. But Ray's past, his criminal record, it followed them wherever they went. They were always on the move, struggling financially.
Man, that's got to be tough on a family. Always having to uproot and start over.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And through it all, Ray kept getting involved in various schemes. He'd land in jail, get out, and then go right back to his old ways. It's like he never even considered going straight.
So this is where things start to get really interesting with what I'm calling his cattle scheme. It's honestly pretty ingenious in a twisted kind of way.
Yeah.
So how did this whole thing work?
Well, Ray knew he couldn't buy and sell cattle directly because of his reputation. So he came up with this plan that targeted some of the most vulnerable people in society. Drifters, homeless folks, anyone who was disconnected and wouldn't be missed.
And he would offer them jobs as farmhands, right? Like a chance to get back on their feet.
Exactly. He'd gain their trust, give them a sense of hope, and then he'd take them to cattle markets and have them purchase cattle using bad checks that he provided.
Oh, wow. So he was using these guys as pawns in his scheme.
Yeah, basically. He'd get the cattle, sell them for a profit, and then the farmhand would just disappear, vanished. No connection to Ray, no witnesses.
And how long can he keep getting away with that? I mean, somebody had to notice eventually.
You're right. He did end up serving time for the scheme, but each time he got out of jail, he'd just refine his operation, becoming more careful, more selective about the types of farmhands he recruited.
So it's like he was learning from his mistakes, but in the worst way possible, targeting people who are even more isolated, even less likely to be missed.
Exactly. And this is where the story takes a really dark turn, because one of Ray's former employees, a man named Jack McCormick, ends up playing a crucial role in exposing the truth about what was happening on that farm.
Right, McCormick goes to the police. I was reading about that.
Yeah, he contacted Crime Stoppers and reported that he had seen human bones on the property. And he also claimed that Ray had tried to kill him.
Wait, so this wasn't just a hunch or suspicion. McCormick had actually witnessed something terrifying.
That's right. And while the police were initially hesitant to believe him, given Ray's long history of criminal activity, they decided to investigate.
And I'm guessing they were glad they did. What happened when they went to the Copeland farm?
Well, it was like something out of a movie. In October 1989, dozens of officers with bloodhounds and a search warrant descended on the Copeland farm.
Talk about a scene.
It was. And at first they didn't find much of anything. They were searching the grounds, digging around, and then as they started to focus on a nearby barn, well, that's when they made a horrifying discovery.
They found bodies.
They did. The bodies of 3 young men hidden away in that barn.
So it wasn't just a cattle scheme anymore. This was something far more sinister.
Exactly. And the investigation was just getting started. As they continued to search the property, they found even more bodies, all showing signs of being shot with a .22 caliber rifle.
And I'm assuming they found the murder weapon as well.
They did. The same type of rifle was discovered in the Copeland home. The evidence against Ray was really starting to pile up. But what about Faye? Was she involved in these murders, or was she a victim herself?
That's the question that keeps coming back to me. Was she a willing participant? Or was she trapped in a nightmare, living in fear of her husband?
Well, that's exactly what her defense team tried to argue during her trial, which took place in November of 1990. They painted a picture of Faye as a submissive wife who was completely under Ray's control.
So they were saying that she was too afraid to speak out or defy him?
Exactly. They argued that she had suffered years of abuse and was essentially a prisoner in her own home.
But the prosecution had a different take on things, right?
Oh, yeah. They weren't buying the whole innocent bystander act. They pointed out that Faye kept very detailed records of all the farmhands, including their social security numbers.
Which, seems pretty suspicious. That kind of information would be useful if you were trying to make someone disappear permanently.
Right, it definitely raised some eyebrows. And that, along with other evidence, led them to believe that Faye was more involved than she was letting on.
So, what did the jury decide?
They sided with the prosecution. Faye was found guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to death 4 times and given an additional life sentence.
Wow. 4 death sentences. That's incredibly rare, isn't it?
It is, and it shows just how convinced the jury was of her guilt, that she was complicit in these horrific crimes.
What about Ray? Did he stand trial as well?
He did. A few months later, Ray went on trial and was also convicted on 5 counts of murder. He, too, received a death sentence. But what's really chilling is his reaction to Faye's sentencing.
Yeah, I remember reading about that. It was bone-chilling.
When he was told that Faye had also been sentenced to death, he just shrugged it off. He reportedly said, well, those things happen to some, with no emotion whatsoever.
It's like he had absolutely no remorse for the lies they had taken.
None at all. And it was a stark contrast to Faye's reaction. Throughout the trial, she maintained her innocence. She was visibly upset when the verdict was read.
So what happened next? Did they both end up on death row?
Well, Ray died of natural causes in prison in 1993, but Faye's case took a few more twists and turns. Her lawyers filed numerous appeals, arguing that some key evidence had been left out of her original trial.
What kind of evidence?
They focused on the history of abuse that Faye had suffered at the hands of Ray. They said the jury should have heard more about that.
I can see how that might be relevant, but how could that have impacted her sentencing?
Well, the defense argued that this evidence of abuse could have explained why Faye didn't leave Ray or go to the police, even though she knew what he was doing. They were trying to show that she was acting out of fear, not malice.
So they were building a case for coercion, suggesting that she was trapped and couldn't escape the situation.
Precisely. And in a rather surprising turn of events, the judge actually agreed with them.
Really? He overturned her conviction?
He overturned the death sentences. But her murder convictions, those were upheld. In 1999, Judge Autry Smith ruled that excluding the evidence about the abuse was a significant error. He said it could have influenced the jury's decision to impose the death penalty.
Wow. So what happened to her sentence then?
It was changed to 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole.
So a partial victory for the defense. But she was still facing a life behind bars.
That's right. However, things changed again just a few years later. Faye had a severe stroke that left her partially paralyzed and unable to speak.
Oh, that's awful.
It was. And given her declining health, the governor of Missouri at the time, Bob Holden, granted her medical parole in 2002. She was allowed to go back to her hometown of Chillicothe and live out her final days in a nursing home. She died there in 2002 at the age of 82.
So she did get her wish in the end, to not die in prison.
She did. And throughout it all, she never admitted to any involvement in the murders.
It's a chilling reminder that even when justice is served, there are still so many questions that remain unanswered.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that this case isn't just about Ray and Faye Copeland. There were victims, real people whose lives were tragically cut short by their actions.
That's right. Let's talk about the victims. Who were these men and what brought them to the Copeland's farm? Their names were Dennis K. Murphy, Wayne Warner, Jimmy Dale Harvey, John W. Freeman, and Paul J. Coward. They were all drifters, some struggling with addiction, but all looking for work and a chance at a better life.
And tragically, they ended up at the Copeland's farm. These were men who, for different reasons, found themselves living on the edges of society, making them vulnerable to exploitation.
Reading about their stories, it's hard not to feel a sense of sadness and anger. These were real people. They had families. They had lives. And their futures were stolen by this couple who saw them as nothing more than disposable pawns.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that there are real human costs to these kinds of crimes. The families of the victims are left to deal with the unimaginable pain of losing a loved one, and they're often left with so many unanswered questions.
Absolutely.
Ugh.
What about the town of Mooresville? How did this case affect the community?
It had a profound impact, for sure. Mooresville was, and still is, a small, tight-knit community, and the idea that such horrific acts could happen right in their backyard, well, it really shook people to their core.
Yeah, it just goes to show you that evil can lurk in the most unexpected places.
It also highlights how complex our justice system can be, determining guilt, figuring out appropriate punishment, and ensuring everyone gets a fair trial, especially in cases with abuse and manipulation. It's not easy.
And the fact that Faye's death sentence was overturned, but her murder convictions remained, that really speaks to that complexity.
Yeah, it raises all sorts of questions, like what does accountability really mean in this case? And how much was Faye actually responsible for what happened? Was she a victim herself or a willing accomplice?
That's the part that I keep coming back to. I honestly don't know what to think. Maybe it was a bit of both.
It's the kind of question that sticks with you long after you've learned all the facts. And I think it's something that everyone has to wrestle with on their own. There's no easy answer.
Well, this deep dive has certainly been a journey into the darker side of human nature. I think it's safe to say that this case, the Copeland killings, they're going to keep fascinating and horrifying people for years to come.
It's a story that forces us to think about some uncomfortable truths. The fact that humans are capable of incredible cruelty and deceit, it makes you question everything, even those closest to you.
If you are interested in learning more, we encourage you to check out some of the many books, articles, and documentaries that have been published about this case.
And as you delve deeper into this story, keep this question in mind. How well can we ever really know another person, even those we think we know best?
That's a good point. We often make judgments based on appearances, but the Copeland case shows us that people can have hidden depths, dark secrets that may never fully come to light.
It's definitely something to think about, especially as we try to understand our own relationships and make sense of the world around us.
Well, until next time, stay curious, keep asking questions, and keep searching for the truth.
And maybe leave a light on tonight, just in case.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the chilling story of the Copeland killings. We'll see you in the next one.